Very good evening, everyone. We'll start in another 2-3 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll just wait for another 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll start. All right. I think we'll start. So again, very good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope that you're safe, you're well, your family's safe, everyone's well. These are very bad times that we're going through. So we really hope that you're doing well. Uh, Today we have we have the honor of having someone that, I'm having a fan moment here, basically, as I had mentioned earlier as well. We have Dr. Shalini Dal. She's uh, she's an entrepreneur. She is a best-selling author. She's of course an expert at HR and leadership. Has been at the on the jury of so many of the major HR awards that we see out there. Is a contributor to them as an author as well, and has been the CHRO of uh, uh, has been with Deutsche Bank as the director of HR, I believe, and then with Escorts as the CHRO, Escorts Agri. So, it's a great honor to have you here, Dr. Shalini, today. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Suyash. So happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Honestly, my pleasure.
Um, Dr. Shalini, before we really get into the topic, I first want to just start with asking you that how are you doing? We hope everything is all right at your end. Things are okay at your end, given the current circumstances.
Yeah, it's been, if I'm really honest, it's been a stressful set of weeks. We did have a couple of COVID emergencies in our immediate family, and uh, they happened when Delhi was peaking. So, um, as you've probably read, everything was hard to come by. So, it was pretty
Yeah.
stressful for a couple of weeks, but everyone recovered fine. Everyone's back home, and Delhi's curve has started moving in the right direction finally. So, I
Absolutely.
mean, relative to 2-3 weeks ago, the world seems like a better place in Delhi specifically. Of
Of
course,
course,
the country is not safe as yet.
absolutely. Uh, I want to ask you that given this current situation, and I recently read your article on Forbes as well, which was about how companies have responded. Many companies have gone on the right path, given the way the pandemic in general. How important has empathy become in this case, that an organization be empathetic? What is the importance of that right now?
Such a good question, Siyash, because I actually feel this is empathy's golden moment. I mean, if an organization isn't able to display empathy during a pandemic, then what are we talking about? So, and to be honest, I was pretty heartened all through the pandemic, right from the time it started, and we were in conversations with leaders to understand, what is it that they're doing in their organizations.
Yeah,
I felt that most organizations have really been able to step up their game. Now, of course, it's for the people who work in those organizations to finally give their verdict about whether it's enough or not. But certainly, there are so many leaders who I've sort of regarded as being pretty hard nosed and not the kind to, spend time on, conversations. How are you? How's the family?
yeah,
But I think pretty much as soon as the lockdown started and the pandemic started, that was the biggest shift. Senior leaders, mid managers, first time managers, just spending a lot of time trying to understand the person. So
Mhm.
the shift sort of began there. But of course, nothing prepared us for the second wave,
No, not at all.
and not at all, right? And I don't know if this is politically correct to say or not, but the reality is the state did not really play the kind of role one would have
Yeah,
expected the state to play, right? In terms of, stepping in and helping out people. So for the most part, people were left to figure things out on their own, like
yeah,
we did in our own family. You find your own bed, your own oxygen, your own whatever, medicines, etc., etc. So one of the other heartening things I found was that many organizations have tried to help in some way or the other. And of course, this help means is quite different in different organizations. So in some, it might be just as simple as, okay, these are verified numbers. Given the WhatsApp deluge of
yes,
numbers, for a caregiver, it's impossible to spend your entire day just checking out. So, right from there, just simple stuff where,
yes,
okay, these are the numbers you call, this is who to reach out to, etc., to some of the larger organizations going all the way and setting up oxygen beds for their
yes,
people. So I think there's been a much faster response from organizations than the state, to be honest. And I think, in a sense, for me, it was very heartening because a lot of these responses happened within 3-4 days,
yeah,
very fast. So that, along with the fact that I think over the last few months, everybody's recognized the importance of COVID leave.
oh, yeah,
It's just a reality that almost everyone today has had either someone in their immediate family or extended family go through a COVID experience. And if you've been a caregiver, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, it's quite a stressful moment. There's
yeah,
really nothing much you can do. You play a caregiver pretty much for as a full-time job. So I think organizations have really stepped up. I think 2020 and 2021 have um, really shown the light on the empathetic side of organizations, because I think one thing which was maybe not as acceptable before the pandemic for managers or leaders to step out of their way, show concern, show care.
yeah,
Today, it's become central to the way you lead. If you're not doing this, then you're immediately sending a message that you're on your own and
yeah,
we're not there for you. And the need of the hour has been knowing that there is someone other than me and my address book who is going to be there for me in my time of need. So I think organizations have, on the whole, done a pretty decent job, at least far better than the other organizations who should have been playing that role, to be honest.
yes. That's absolutely true. I mean, I recently heard that, not just, in fact, even in our own company, we now have setting up an internal task force, wherein, people who can help you get those verified leads that you were talking about can help with that. And that I know that a lot of companies are making such task forces purely to volunteer. So we are seeing
Yeah.
quite a bit of action in that from that point of view currently during this wave.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm, Let me ask you this question, and this is going a little further into the future. You think that there are a lot of companies are in the danger of maybe, they're acting like this right now because, oh, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but afterwards there will be less attention being paid to the whole empathy thing, or do you think that's here to stay?
So that's a really good question. So, see, I think the kind of intensity of focus, hopefully, the pandemic will end, sometime next year. And it won't need that kind of intensity, the kind of intensity which I think at the peak of a wave you need, because,
Yes.
it's a matter of life and death, very, very literally. So, it's a very different, role that organizations are playing.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, this will hopefully go away because the need for that will not be there. But if you look at, I work a lot in the future of workspace, and what
Yeah.
are the skills that are going to be needed for leaders,
Correct.
organizations, as we move into a much faster changing world. And if you look at, say, what the World Economic Forum predicts, or any of the more reputed organizations predict as being one of the key future skills, empathy is right there, because it's not so easy to automate, at least now. So, if we look at what are the future skills that stay with leaders, aren't automated quite so readily, do not move on to technology, empathy, judgment, wisdom. And, wisdom, judgment are all combinations of empathy plus something
Yeah.
else along with it, building culture. So I don't think empathy will become, I mean, less important in any of the good organizations. Yes, it's certainly possible that there will be some organizations who aren't quite seeing this as yet, who aren't
Yeah.
seeing how critical empathy is going to be. Because on the one hand, there's this whole piece of you don't get automated, right? That's the more obvious, very
Yes.
easy to explain part. But then there's the other part, that if you want to build an organization which is very responsive, and which is what all future organizations are going to need to be, it only rests on people feeling like they belong in a place. And that's
Absolutely.
almost impossible to create without empathy. So I think for any organization which is, I would say, halfway smart, there will be an understanding of just how critical empathy is. And I mean, if we just look at the fact that we've all been working virtually, or at least in a hybrid mode, the importance of empathy has been, it's never been as high as it is today,
Yeah.
simply because you don't have the, okay, let's grab tea, coffee together, let's have lunch
Absolutely.
together. And not that I condone smoking, but let's go out for
Yeah.
a smoke together. You don't have any of those nice little bonding moments. So you have to
Absolutely.
create those moments. And I think when the pandemic started, a lot of leaders didn't quite understand this. So the first few months, I think there was like an overkill of Zoom and,
Yeah.
overscheduled days with perhaps some bit of micromanagement of tasks and, who's doing what. But then pretty soon, I think many, I won't say all, leaders began to understand that, this is not going to work, because if you want to build engagement in a virtual or a hybrid world, you have to show that you care first, and in a much more obvious manner than perhaps many realize. So I don't think it's going to go away. I think its format is going to shift, because empathy is a key future of work skill. It's right there in the kind of products you're going to design. So what's your empathy and understanding of the
Yeah.
customer needs? Um, for those of you who work with design thinking, empathy is like right at the center of design thinking, the ability to understand what is it that people need without their necessarily even being able to say it out loud, but being able to read it from, how they respond to what is it that you put out there. So it's important for the customer, it's important for the employee, because organizations of tomorrow are going to need to be, if they want to survive, so much more agile. And if you want to build those agile organizations, you absolutely have to have layers of empathy actually within the organization.
Absolutely. Um, Again, to all the people who have joined us, by the way, we're just in discussion with Dr. Shalini here. We're talking about how empathy is relevant, whether it is during the current times or the future once the pandemic is over as well. You heard this word that Dr. Shalini was using, future of work. She actually has her own series, with a weekly series on LinkedIn by that same name, and I think it's definitely one of my favorites. You guys should definitely check it out. Um,
Thank you. Thank you.
and tell us a little bit about where this changed. Suppose a company has been more in the classical, command mode and wants to start somewhere to make this switch to being a more empathetic organization. Where does it start? Does it start from the leadership? Is it the HR's duty? Where does this change really start?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think this has been a challenge because a lot of organizations today may have been created in another world, and in another world where command, control, authority sort of worked. It worked. It was functional. It was efficient. The thing about authority and hierarchy is it's extremely efficient in a relatively stable world, because obviously the leader always has the answer or somewhat of an answer, and why waste everybody's time, and this is what you do, and end of business. But the moment the world starts changing really fast, and there's research after research which proves one point, that the organizations which are able to adapt to unforeseen business circumstances are always those which have a much higher level of decentralization, empowerment, autonomy, because it's simply not possible for, one small set of leaders to take decisions. And frankly, you can see that in our own country's response to the pandemic. If we
Absolutely.
had enough institutions which were able to do what they were able to do in a more decentralized way, we would have responded to the pandemic much, much better. So, what we see at a grand scale, at the
Correct.
country level, is what you will see at a smaller scale, in an organizational level. That when everything's changing fast, when you need really, really quick responses, centralization, command and control just doesn't work efficiently. So it's no longer efficient. So I think the first starting point will be just understanding that, everyone says leadership contingency models, etc., blah, blah, blah. But this is what it means. It worked then when, someone with experience knew precisely what the right response in a situation was going to be. But it doesn't quite work when the situation is changing very rapidly, and the person who knows the right response is the person who's at the point, the one who's actually seeing things unfold. So, it starts with that realization. But then empathy is both an intention and a practice. It's
Absolutely.
both. So the intention part will come when you see it's this is the way of the future. And of course, it can come from research. It can also come from some of these lists of organizations which do well over a period of time, well financially. uh, where do their skills lie? And we see increasingly that empathetic organizations just make a ton more money because they're
Wow.
able to build that kind of culture where people understand how to collaborate, they understand how to work with each other, they have been empowered enough to take decisions far more quickly. Then of course you have to actually practice the skill, and that always has to come right from the top, because it's not what a leader says that's as important as what people see you do. So, it's a little bit like parenting, that you can never be off. Your kids are always watching you. It's something like that with being a leader. People who work in your organizations are always watching you to see, okay, in this organization, this is how I'm supposed to behave. So it does start right at the top, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. Can you give us some examples of this without naming names or anything? Some actual example that you've seen in your own life with any of the people that you may have worked with, you may have coached or mentored. Any examples that you could give of how the leadership could be following these practices to be able to make that culture change?
Yeah, so actually, there's this really interesting concept in organizational theory. It's called the founder's blueprint. It's actually it's a very powerful concept. What it basically says is that, even before your current set of leaders arrive on the scene,
Hmm.
the actual DNA of the organization or the blueprint of the organization is created by the founder. And it's created in the very early days by simplest of decisions. So let's talk about empathy, because that's our conversation today. So every organization has two objectives which are not always in tandem. So there is a really wonderful and very smart consultant, Ashok Malhotra, who, I think operates out of Bangalore these days, who told me 20 years ago something I've never forgotten. He said, never forget that an organization is both a human collective and a purposive instrument. So, there you have it. There are two very different dimensions of being an organization. There's just the fact that you're there to do something. And that something in most commercial organizations is, okay, provide a service, earn some money, make some profit. So there's that part of it, which is, in a sense, the official reason why you exist as an organization, perhaps the more legitimately spoken about reason as well. But while you're doing that, you're also a human collective. You are a collection of people who relate as human beings relate to one another. So these two don't always go hand in hand, which means that if you're a founder, you're going to be making calls right in the early days. Okay, employee number 2 has fallen sick.
Yeah.
What should I do about it? The customer number 3 has this challenge. Our service doesn't quite, fit in there. What should my response be? Should my response be, you're wrong, we told you it was this, and it is this, so it's that? Or is it going to be something else? So you're setting sort of the blueprint right in the early days by deciding, how am I going to respond to the first series of challenges? So just the way, so like in Hindi or in Indian philosophy, we say sanskar, as these values which you sort of transmit, so kind of invisibly. Actually, a founder is doing that. They're setting the blueprint or the sanskar of the organization by what do they do when they're faced with dilemmas where you could do X or you could do Y, and both have a good logic for them. After, an organization is therefore making a profit, and if an employee is sick, then you're not going to be able to use his or her valuable resources for a period of time. So that points in one direction. On the other hand, the fact that you're a human collective points in another direction of saying, okay, can I understand and take care of you? So it's how you make these sort of, when you are faced with these potential dilemmas, how do you make those choices? That sets the ball rolling for many, 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 many years. And this happens even before your current set of leaders come on stage. And that's why you, as employees, we experience it, right? That we go into organization A and we just know that, here, if something happens to me, they'll kind of look after me, and they're there for me. And then we go into another organization and we know, no, here there's nobody for you. It's like everyone for themselves, and it's a whatever, dog eat dog world here or whatever. So this wasn't set by whoever's your current leadership. Actually, this was set by whenever your organization was sort of created, and the decisions which were taken then about what's the right response for us. And then, of course, that sort of sets off a cycle. Not to say that cultures can't change, but I'm just highlighting just how difficult it is, because once the ball is rolling, there are just so many things. You're going to attract a certain kind of people. You'll build a network of, ecology around your own organization of people who respond to you in similar ways. So it's like it's a tangled web that you sort of win. So that's, some of the examples. It starts with actually the simple stuff, and then goes on to the bigger stuff, practices, systems, what we call, like, okay, in HR practice, let's have COVID leave, or let's organize a vaccination camp, which many organizations beautifully are doing at this point in time. All that comes later. First is, what's your orientation? Would you even consider this? Do you think it's an important thing to do in the first place? So well before the practices, well before the systems, is what's in your culture. Between a human collective and a purposive instrument, like, no, you can't be completely in one way or the other, but within that sort of spectrum, where do you kind of tend to make choices, and what kind of decisions do you make? Long answer to your question.
No,
actually.
absolutely. But I think that's a very important point to understand. I think there's a lot of questions that come from leadership that, clearly there's a lot of onus on me. And then what do I need to do? What am I doing wrong? Or what do I need to do right? And that answer is clearly very important, I think. And that the amount of knowledge in that answer, I think, just sort of demonstrates how important it is to be on top of this thing and really make that change.
Actually, if an organization today wants to check that out, then, I think it would be a great idea to have an audit done. I mean, and not an audit the way you do an accounts audit, because obviously that wouldn't make sense. But there are softer mechanisms to kind of sense. A lot of them would be observational, checking communications, checking actual actions, seeing what choices were made at what points in time. Because as I said, actions speak louder than words. It really doesn't matter what's up on the wall as your set of core values. It really doesn't matter what you said in a particular town hall. People are watching what did you actually do,
Correct.
in different situations. So I think it's
Absolutely.
great to get a sense, if you think it's an important thing for you as a leader, it's great to get a sense of, is it being experienced within your organization? And yes, no, where not. And of course, empathy by itself, frankly, there's the simple definition of the ability to take another's perspective. But in a more complex understanding of empathy, there are many other dimensions. It translates into how well people are able to collaborate, the extent to which they're able to trust each other, the extent to which an organization works in an ethical manner because they have empathy not just for their employees, but for the outside world, and understand the role that they are playing in the larger space or larger world per se. So it translates into many other downstream sort of large constructs. And I think it's very helpful for an organization to get a sense of, okay, where am I? And therefore, what should I be doing next?
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Shani, you have spent a fair amount of time abroad as well, right? Like, to let you know, guys, I think Dr. Shalini's, when I read, like, the all the organizations, or rather, sorry, the institutions that she's been, like, so Dr. Shalini is an economics grad from St. Stephen's DU. She has an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. She has a PhD from UCLA, and then after that, she's also a fellow of Wharton School of Business. So I mean, you have spent a lot of time abroad, I think, and even in your consultancy work. Do you see that there's a difference between how empathy is given importance abroad as compared to how much importance it is given in India?
Yeah, and I know that there was this really well-known study in 2016, which I think you had mentioned that it sort of put 9 Indian companies in the bottom 10, which is pretty damning. So I'll tell you what. It's a bit of yes and a no kind of a question. And let me start by what is it that Indian organizations tend to do well?
Yeah.
Because there are things with that Indian organizations tend to do well. And I'm not talking about startups for now, because startups are its own little, animal, which is completely different from organizations of the past. Some of them, at least, are
Sure.
quite different. Indian organizations which have sort of are known for being caring organizations have had a very fundamentally, sort of paternalistic kind of orientation. Like, we will look after you. And see, it
Right.
makes perfect sense. Like, we spoke about the fact that, right now, given the fact that, the state or governments or whatever have not played the kind of role that, maybe one would have hoped for, organizations have stepped in to say, okay, listen, we will tell you what is the actual helpline number. We will tell you who is a legitimate source for buying whatever ABC. So organizations stepped in.
Yeah.
If we look at the large, older organizations, manufacturing organizations, the well-known ones, and what they do in some of their remote locations, where again there is no infrastructure in the city, right? So it's like the state is non-existent. There's no city infrastructure. It is your own township kind of a thing. You see that organizations tend to be kind of pretty paternalistic, and people appreciate it
Right.
because there's a need, there's a service which they're not getting anywhere else. Like even something as simple as electricity.
Yeah.
Maybe in that place it is, there isn't another source of electricity. Maybe there's no other source of recreation. Maybe there's no other pharmacy. There's no other doctor's office, whatever. So
Yeah.
the organizations have stepped in and said, okay, listen, you don't have any of that. We've set this up in this remote area where there is nothing, but we will step in and we will give you housing, electricity, food, da 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 da. So organizations have been really, really good at that. That's been the orientation, very, very fundamentally. And organizations in India have gone maybe further than I would say a common organization in the US has. And my first experience of this was I just come back from LA, where I was for a while, and I had joined Escorts as CHRO. And I remember this was probably in week 1 or 2, where some employee in, because we made tractors in a remote part of the country, was not well and needed medical help. And the HR representatives took it upon themselves to organize everything, for them. So it was really like going above and beyond, because this illness, whatever happened at midnight or 1 o'clock, and the representatives were, they were awake the whole night trying to set things up, etc., etc. So you see that example of, just going above and beyond and looking after people in a certain way. The studies around, the empathy global index, etc., however, looks at empathy in a very different way. It looks at empathy in terms of, to what extent is my own individual voice understood, and where does it get space? So that's
Right.
a very, very different way of looking at empathy. So I have a cat who's, you can
Yeah.
probably
Is she hungry by any chance?
Actually, it's my daughter's room and he lives here. So I think he's
Oh.
complaining that, what am I doing in this room?
Intruder alert.
Yeah, something like that.
So sweet.
So in that definition of empathy, it is like, okay, do you understand my perspective? Do you understand who I am? Do I have a voice? Is there inclusion? Is there, collaboration? So it's a very different dimension of empathy.
Yeah.
And Indian organizations typically don't do well on that at all. We don't. We are
Yeah.
not so good at giving space to the individual to express their view, to be very inclusive of
Yeah.
divergent views, to be very responsive to those divergent views. We're not. We are like,
Yeah.
that's not our strength, right? So when you unpack that, why is it that 9 of the 10 organizations at the bottom of this list were all Indian? It's sort of understandable that we did terribly
Yeah.
on those indexes, because that's not what Indian organizations have typically been about. So
Yeah.
on the other hand, maybe people in those organizations may still call their organization empathetic, because they are providing something else that people are in need for.
Some
So I
kind of
mean,
personalized experience, please.
maybe something which is more akin to being sympathetic almost.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
like, if empathy is the ability to take the other person's perspective, sympathy is, I understand your problem, I'll step in and solve it, for you, but
Absolutely.
I'll do it's something I'm doing for you, on you almost, which is different from the way. And obviously those studies take a Western perspective, because that is who the researchers are. In fact, that particular one which I think you're referring to, it's a British study, so the lens is quite different of
Absolutely. Yeah. There is a
empathy.
certain cultural lens, I guess, which does get missed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
So I think that's the very big difference. I think India is a high power distance country. We know that. There is tons of research showing that. So authority matters, hierarchy matters. It plays out in a certain way. Um, not I mean, a lot of other countries are not as high power distance, which means that you're able to have a voice in a much larger way than maybe you do in India.
Absolutely. So, you're the author of a book. This is, guys, the book is The Secret Life of Organization: Invisible Rules of Success for the Young Indian Professional. Uh, and it's available on Amazon. You can order it. It's published by Hachette India. Uh, Tell me, Dr. Shalini, that while you were writing this book, with respect to the topic at hand, which is being a good organization, a high-performing organization, and at the same time being an empathetic organization, what are some things that you found while maybe researching for this book?
Yeah, I think the couple of things. One, the first thing that just how cultures get hardwired so early in an organization's life, and how you know for the most part people have no idea why an organization
Yeah,
is a particular way. So when we come on the scene as an employee or as a leader, we just know this is how things are done here,
yeah,
and we may not have any idea like why are things done the way they are here. And there's this very strong invisible role that culture plays in what kind of choices and what kind of decisions, are acceptable. So I think that's, one really big part. The other is actually what's going to be important for tomorrow's leaders. And I think, one of the things I said earlier, that as organizations need to be more agile, and as they need to work in a much more distributed way, empathy, which was maybe an optional earlier, becomes absolutely at the heart of things. So it changes everything. It actually changes everything. The reason why, for instance, when I wrote this book, I wasn't as much a part of the future of work sort of thought stream as I am today. But the reason why this is so, such an important part of this conversation is that the world is changing in ways that are going to render organizations born in another era very quickly obsolete. It's almost like, okay,
Yeah.
you're trying to work with a Nokia phone, it's not going to work, even if it's the best designed phone, or, you are still watching Doordarshan, I'm sure it has some really good programs, but that's not the ask, so it's a huge shift. If it's disturbing, shall I just let her out, or do you
Sure.
think it's okay?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Just a second.
Just to let everyone know, we have a brief um, pause for technical reasons, and the technical reason is a cat, which will be removed from the room. But thank you again. Thank you all of you for joining us. We will be after this. We will be opening the floor to your questions. So please either raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute, or you can just type your question in the chat section. Okay. So we'll be coming to that.
So he's actually out of the room now.
Okay.
I have one podcast, as you mentioned, I do the Future of Work series on LinkedIn, and I have one whole episode where not him, but another cat we were fostering for a while. He cried and he cried and he cried and he cried.
Oh.
So, it's like recorded for forever.
Yeah, for pet parents, I think it's just one of those. Yeah, it just happens. It's an everyday thing.
We have actually 4.
Wow.
So
Okay.
1 cat and 3 dogs. So, it's like so much a part of our general ambient noise
Absolutely.
that sometimes we don't even notice it.
100%. 100%. So, I want to ask you this question, which has come to us often from a lot of people, which is, so there's a skepticism in the leadership often, and it comes in this form that if I start being empathetic, the people that who report to me might start taking me for granted, or start, I might look weak. That is a certain conception that people have in their minds. So, you know, what would you say to them about?
Yeah. And I understand, because this conception exactly comes from the older, more prevalent forms of leadership, where, there was this sort of, in this whole command and control, authority flows from the top world view of leadership, it was very important for a leader to have all the answers and to be strong, and strong in a certain way. Like the definition of strong was that, basically, I will tell you what to do, and I will watch what you do, and I'll make sure that you get the job done. And if I'm too empathetic, maybe it's going to come in the way of my insisting that a job be done well. And it worked in that era. It worked because some of the things we sometimes forget is that so many of our fundamental ideas were really in 2 industrial revolutions ago, 100 years back, when
It's true.
most of the work happened in manufacturing, on the shop floor, where there was actually a supervisor who was watching everything you were doing, and there was a right way to do things and there was a wrong way to do things. So if
The
you were on
Henry
an
Ford
assembly line,
way. There was the Henry Ford
absolutely,
way.
absolutely, all those work time studies where you would break a job into
Yeah.
its different activities. So there was a right way to do things, and
Sure.
that was the only way, pretty much. So that's where all of this originated from, that there was a right answer. And who had that right answer? The supervisor or the manager. So
Absolutely.
for work to happen, the employee had to listen to the supervisor or manager, because he mostly he at that time, he's the only one who really knew, and so you followed orders. So that's the worldview in which it originated. The value in knowing where it originated is because you can see just how useless that is in today's context. We are nowhere near a situation where the manager really has a single answer on what needs to happen. So that's really the starting point. That's not the world. That's really not the world. It's like you
Yeah.
learn football, but you're competing in basketball. It's not the same thing. You cannot, you're not going to kick the ball in anywhere. It's not going to work. So the rules are completely different. The other thing is that in today's world, if you want to be successful as a manager, and we look at what is it that employees are asking from their manager, it's actually empowerment, collaboration, coaching. What they're looking for is these styles of leadership which allow an employee a greater voice. They're not looking and do not appreciate
Yeah.
leaders who sort of always seem to know the best and tell you what to do. It's not a style which is valued either. So one, it's ineffective because it doesn't match the context. Your manager, there's no one right answer, and the manager does not know that one right answer, and therefore it's like you're playing the wrong game. And second, it's not even appreciated. In fact, it rubs people the wrong way. So I think, fortunately, I think there are a number of organizations where people are realizing that, this just doesn't work now. It just doesn't work.
Absolutely.
So that's what I would say. I mean, it's a relic of the past.
100%. So Safal had asked this question that companies are driven by profits in such a scenario. Do you think? I think the ultimate answer, Safal, to this is that, as Dr. Shalini mentioned also earlier, that what they have observed is that there's a huge amount of actually companies are more profitable and definitely far better performing if they're also empathetic. So I think it's probably something that has been on the backseat, but we cannot afford to have it on the backseat anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, Dr. Shani, would you be able to answer this, which is, have you experienced any event or incident where you realize that, how important it is for the deep understanding and need for empathy at that time?
I think empathy you value the most when, unfortunately, perhaps there's a difficult situation, when you want empathy or you feel that that's the right response in that particular situation. I mean, I'll give you an example of an organization where the lack of empathy was killing. And this is an organization where many years back, many years back, I did a consulting project. It was an organization which made household appliances. And one factory had been sold to another both global companies. There'd been a transition. And that was an organization where the new management, because it was under new management, had been tasked to reduce the manpower in the factory. And I have never seen anything done so badly as I had in this. And both are globally huge names. So, they're not poor companies, but it's like, even in a plant, what does the plant head interpret as his right role in that? What's the right response he interprets, in that situation? Obviously, with the new leadership, again, very well-known company, for whatever reason, the plant manager's own interpretation was that empathy in this situation not required at all. So I had interviewed 55 people to understand their experience. And I was called in because look at the motivation. The plant manager's worry was, is there going to be an IR challenge?
Okay.
So he wanted someone to come and speak to people and just understand how exactly unhappy are people. So do I have a problem coming up, on my hands? And the layoffs were done so badly in that particular situation that employees I would speak to, there's one statement I can never forget because it was just, this guy tells me, "Madam, आप हमको देख रहे हो?" It's in Hindi, right? It was, लेकिन हम एक्चुअली हैं ही नहीं यहाँ, सिर्फ हमारी बॉडी है, हम तो कब के मर गए. So, that was the kind of despair. And, people left with this feeling of we are worth nothing. Because in this particular organization, you walked up to the office in the morning and you didn't know if you'd have a job by the time you left. The organization actually reduced from 7,200 to 1,200. So it was a massive,
Massive layoff.
massive,
Yeah.
massive layoff, uh, which is the company's right to do, except that it was done
Yeah.
so badly that in the experience of everyone, it was like completely arbitrary. It could
Yeah.
be like I'm wearing, I have a mustache one day, so I'm out. Maybe I'm wearing the wrong color shoes, so I'm out. So in the minds of people, it was like, you know, anything and I'm out.
Yeah.
And the manner in which it was done was also one where, just come into my room, here's the resignation letter, all typed, just sign it, go.
Yeah.
So it was, I still remember it because I couldn't sleep those nights. It was
Yeah.
it was so painful, just seeing that, can anyone do something so
Yeah.
poorly as this? So that's an example of an organization with zero, I would say, empathy in this particular situation. um, Many years later, for another large company, one really well-known company, I did a similar study of how did they do downsizing, and that company went from 75,000 to 25,000. So that was
Right.
also a huge,
Huge.
downsizing. But they handled the process. It's not going to be painless ever, right? It's never going to be painless, but they handle the process so well that when I kept thinking and I did a sort of global benchmarking, I could not think of anything else that could be done in such a situation, which included like, depending on very, 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 very generous severance packages, medical facilities for the organization to continue, great efforts at outplacement, lots of counseling,
Yeah.
gradually over a period of time. So that's those are it's in the painful times that you're really tested, and this is where your values show up. That
Absolutely.
what do you really believe in? It's possible both organizations say that we care for our people, we care for our people, but it's when you're faced with a difficult situation that your actions speak. It tells you what you really care about.
100%. Hind had mentioned that few years into the future, everything is going to be handled by employees themselves. Their ability to handle situations would be 10 times better in such times. And that's absolutely, I think that's exactly like you said. I think we are headed to a more decentralized approach. We
Yeah.
need that decentralized approach, whether at the government level or at the company level,
Yeah.
and that is the future. So, Hind, you're absolutely right. Uh, we have another question, which is that uh, so we had some HRs basically who asked us this, and the question was that, we have so much to do. Generally, won't this end up taking up even more time? Do I? My plate is already full. Am I just not overburdening myself if I add something like an empathy into uh, the
Yeah.
equation?
Yeah, it's a good question and a reasonable one, to be honest, because
Yeah,
HR leaders do have
a
their
lot.
plates really, really full. So,
Yeah,
I mean, there are two things. One, it's not an HR thing, because frankly, and I have been in HR myself, nobody cares what HR says or does. You know, Nobody cares. You can say whatever. What you can do is have some good empathetic practices. Yes, that much is in your control, and you can say, okay, COVID leave, vaccination camp, set up good, whatever, oxygen bed, whatever. That stuff you can do. That's still in your hands. But in terms of influencing the culture, nobody cares what you say. People are looking at what the actual leaders, business leaders are doing. So it is, in a sense, the responsibility is more there than it is here. But in the organizations of tomorrow, as I said, when you look at what is it that remains as a leadership role, what is the leadership role? The leadership role is to get the job done in an environment that's changing really, really fast. And that's going to need empathy for the customer. It's going to need empathy for the larger world you're playing in, because that's how you're going to show up and people will say, okay, sustainable, ethical, all of that stuff. Are you playing that role? And of course, it starts from within, empathy for within, because your employees are going to, I mean, for you to be successful, there's going to need to be a lot more decentralization, autonomy, empowerment, innovation at a grassroots and, across the organization than is perhaps needed, today. So it's a new rule. It's a new rule book entirely from maybe the ones we've been used to in the past.
100%. Uh, we have this question from Puneet, which is a really nice question. It is, why is the HR profession so underrespected in India? How can it be strengthened?
Oh gosh, that question I don't even know if I can answer. I think this whole thing, remember when I started that there's this fundamental challenge in organizations. You're a purposive instrument, you're a human collective. Now, when you have your leadership team meetings, guess what's the conversation going to be about? It starts with, okay, what are the numbers for the month? What are the numbers for the quarter? What's the balance sheet, what the financial statement saying? It's there that
Bottom
you
line.
spend
Yeah,
most of your time, right? The purposive instrument part of it. Now the reality is that you're not going to be able to do this for too long unless your human collective is strong. And that's something which, I mean, you can go back 50 years in research and scholarship, you'll find the exact
absolutely.
same answer again and again. And this is an Indian weakness also, let me tell you. eh, no, I hope I don't get into trouble for this, but in India, we're very quick at seeing an opportunity and grasping, right? We're really, really quick. We'll do it faster than perhaps anyone else in the world.
Yeah,
But what we really are not so good at is building a great organization that will sustain not just one business opportunity, but 1,000 business opportunities. Because now to build a good organization, I need a great culture. I need people to feel empowered, engaged, to feel that they are, feel like contributing their best, etc., etc. That's not so easy to do because now you're working with all the invisibles that is not so, I mean, you can put measures to it, but they don't come to you the way a financial statement, sort of will be there at the end of the month. So Indian organizations, I find in particular, are much, much stronger on this part. The business opportunity, let's move fast. What someone else anywhere else in the world would do in 7 days, we'll do in 1 day. It'll be done.
yeah,
It may not be done to that level, but it'll be done. So our speed is tremendous. We won't necessarily build the organization. We'll have great camaraderie. We'll have great that. We'll also have, a lot of fun in that process. But are we building the organization which will have the ability to work and, replicate this a million times as the situation changes? We're not good at that at all. We don't even see that as important. So that also goes into why in India in particular, we aren't so good at this part of recognizing the role HR can play.
absolutely. Uh, this is a question that has come to us often, and I think I want your take on it. Which is that during the pandemic there were cases that employees were hired and then just 3 months later they were let go. Does that signify or symbolize in any way that the organization is empathetic or non-empathetic?
Yeah, there have been some, cases like that. And um, see, here's the thing. I think leaders don't always understand what they are signaling because they are signaling a lot when they do that. Now, on the one hand, maybe that was the only way the organization could survive or show up their numbers. And if that's the case, then that is the organization's right for survival. But even when you're doing something like that, at least understanding what are going to be the implications, because you are sending a signal. Forget to the people whom you've asked you to go, that's only one small part of it, but you're also sending a signal to everyone around you that, okay, um, you know this is the way we work. I find, to be honest, to my great joy, that there are many more organizations who have done this time pay cuts rather than
Yeah,
layoffs. And actually research has always backed this, that when an organization does pay cuts, one, of course, because the people are there, your ability to bounce back is, it's just so rational, right? The moment the economy picks up, whatever, you are there, the people are right there, and your configuration is in order, it's working the
absolutely.
way it
Yeah,
needs, your machinery is there. But it is also a bonding experience for an organization that, we came together. And if an organization knows how to handle this well in a way that really shows the numbers, why it's necessary, why we're doing, and where the leadership plays a role in sometimes taking a bigger pay cut,
yeah,
than others down the line, it brings people together, that we survived a crisis by coming together.
Yeah.
So, I mean, both ways are possible. Layoffs are inevitable. I'm not saying that they will not happen. They will happen even more in the next 10 years as,
Yeah.
technology plays a bigger and bigger role. But um, even in those choices, how you choose to do that and when you choose to do that, uh, it plays a big role in whether you're strengthening the organization having done this, or whether you've actually sent all the signals which are saying, we're pretty transactional, you
Yeah.
know we pay you for X work, do X work, don't ask for more. So you don't have to say anything, it's in your actions, people are reading it, people are making their own conclusions. So I think for leaders it's, and I think many do understand, it's not that they don't.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think this is one question that we have sort of covered in one of our previous sessions also, which is that, where does, and I think I kind of asked you, where does a leader really start? But more importantly, where does a leader start if they are used to being authoritarian? How can they go about developing that empathy? And I think, so, Safal asked, is there any exercise? Now, one of the things that I think really came to in one of our previous episodes was that we need to learn to listen. Do you think that's an important element? Are there more elements to it as well?
Yeah, I mean, listening is at a personal level,
Yeah.
like interpersonal listening is the starting point. And it is, something like, tell me more, rather than, if I have this problem, jumping and giving a solution. So at an interpersonal level, that is 100% absolutely true. Seeking to sort of understand where the person is coming from before anything else, before anything else. But at an organizational level, there are other tools as well. So, those of you who are, fond of or understand design thinking, when you put the human at the center of all design, there are actually tools around. How do you do that? So you do observations, you do interviews, you do, focus groups, you do conversations, you do prototype testing, whatever. So
Yeah.
there are practices, there are tools that you can do to use, to get a sense of what is it that people actually want. So it's not that it isn't there. I think it the intention needs to be there. And I think as more and more leaders realize that they're going to be more successful if they're able to have a style that encourages collaboration, encourages a quick turnaround, encourages innovation,
Yeah.
agility. This is the kind of stuff which the future is made of. And that style requires an empathetic concern for themselves, their customers, the world, all three dimensions. It'll start from there. But once you have that, there are tools which you can use. And of course, at an interpersonal level, the best tool is simply listening.
Can you maybe tell us maybe one or two other tools as well, which are at a more, if not at an interpersonal level, more, at a more general level?
So, at a organizational level, I think you're asking, right? See, at an organizational level, understanding, let's say, your customer, right? That's an external constituency, which as the world changes faster and faster, your customer is also changing faster and faster,
Yeah.
and their response to your product is also determined by what else is happening in their world, right? So one of the reasons why, for instance, just as an example, personalization of even your L&D forum,
Yeah.
whatever your has become such a thing, is because we are so used to the Netflix and Amazon Prime telling us exactly what show we should watch, what matches
Absolutely.
us, right, our sensibilities. So we want our L&D whatever portal to also tell us the training that will be suitable for us. So we are impacted by everything else that's happening. So there are tools which do things like trend mapping, for instance. We just understand what else is going on out there that's not about what you are doing. Like, for instance, if I were to design a learning portal without awareness of anything else, I probably won't get the answer right, because I won't know what the benchmarks are, what is going on in people's mind, what is it that they're asking for. So you need to sort of widen the sort of scope of what you're looking
Yeah.
at to be able to genuinely be empathetic. because the employee
Absolutely.
will not be able to necessarily tell you why they want this, or maybe sometimes they can. This one was relatively easy, but very often they can't necessarily articulate. And the thing with empathy as it plays out in the future is your ability to get what is not being articulated. So listening in a certain way, or getting information by consciously reaching out and getting. So when you do trend mapping, for instance, you take a look at what's happening in your employees' world. What are the different things that are happening in your customers' world? What are all the other things that are happening at a people level, a culture level, at a technology level, and at a global geopolitical level? So there are formal tools. Actually, if you're so interested, there are formal tools to understand what's happening in the world. And, sometimes I myself am surprised that there's so much out there that we don't know, because it hasn't quite entered the popular conversation within organizations. But those tools are there that give you a sense of, okay, employees today, this is what they're looking for, because this is what they have come to expect. These are the other influences happening in their life. So this is, sort of part of being more empathetic.
Uh, I have one last question, which again Puneet had asked, which is, what would be the top skills which can be developed, which leaders are required to build, those future successful organizations of
Oh,
tomorrow?
lovely question.
Yeah.
So Puneet, it's really shifted, to be honest. What was needed from leadership 10 years back and the future now, of course, you can also argue some things are similar, but there have been many things that have really shifted. Like, for instance, sense making. This wasn't such a big deal earlier because the world wasn't changing so fast. Today, if you and the higher up you go in the organization, obviously the more important it gets. So sense making, starting from when so many things are changing, how am I connecting the dots? Firstly, do I have any clue what is changing in the external environment? So if in the past, to be a good leader, you sort of had to, you say, okay, what are my KRAs, how's the business doing? You're going to be dead, because you need to have a much wider perspective. The things that are going to actually disrupt you are not going to be in your KRAs at all. They never
Yeah.
will, because you don't know what those things are going to be. They're going to be outside that. So making sense of the world as it's changing is number one. It was not a skill that was terribly important earlier. Tomorrow, it's super important. And the more senior you are, the more important it is. So having your own set of practices, tools, intelligence, whatever, that allows you to get that much broader view. As I said, culture, technology, people, geopolitical, how are these different
Yeah.
things playing out? So sense making, making is right there. Then sense giving, because as things change, the organization looks to the leaders to explain what is happening. Like, for instance, even in the pandemic today, people look to leadership and say, okay,
Yeah.
please help us understand what is happening. The fact is, we may or may not be satisfied by the answers we're getting, but that's our ask, right? Because at a personal level, we don't know. We don't know how long this will play out. What will the second wave, how will it peak? Will there be a third wave? What will that look like, right? So we don't know. So I'm
Yeah.
taking that example because as organizations are going to be in greater and greater flux, they're going to need their leadership to say, okay, this is the big picture that I can see, because you have your systems and you have your expert teams and think tanks and whatever. You have resources that an individual employee obviously cannot have. So how will I connect the dots for people inside the organization to understand what's happening? So in times of change, you need both. And then you need the capacity to build an organization that has the capacity for innovation. And innovation is no longer R&D. In fact, whatever's happening in R&D is really, sort of, it's not your huge disruptors. Like Airbnb did not build a better hotel room, right, with a better sink or whatever. It didn't do that. It changed the
Yeah.
business model, right, or a Uber and a taxi, whatever. So it's the business model which has changed, which is not an R&D thing. So
Yes.
innovation now is played across some 10 different fronts. And for that to happen, the organization has to have that capacity for innovation. And to do that, in turn, you need a culture of a certain kind, because every organization does not inherently have the soil where innovation grows. And those kinds of cultures inherently have empowerment, decentralization, highly skilled people collaborative decision making. We know that there are some of these pieces
Yeah.
with capabilities in innovation. And then finally, this is a long answer, right?
No,
Finally,
no,
you
that's
have to
perfect.
have the capacity for agility, which is moving really, really fast because time horizons are shrinking. And that's another thing, like how fast can you move and quickly get something out of the door? Much, much shorter timelines than any time in the past. So the whole skill set of what you need from a future ready leader is quite different, frankly, from the skill set that was needed any time in the past.
Absolutely. Dr. Shanli, thank you so much. I think the audience has absolutely loved, I have absolutely loved this session. The insights that we got from you today are, I think this is a very memorable night for us. Today, to everyone who joined us, thank you so much for joining us. We learned about, you know, why, how empathy is here to stay, whether we are in the pandemic, the second wave, or the non-pandemic days, the post-pandemic days. It's here to stay. We looked at what leadership needs to do. What are some of those qualities and skills that they need to develop? Number one, especially at the interpersonal level, we learned about it. You need to listen. We did look at how India is still behind other countries. We need to get there, and how this is the need of the hour for companies to be absolutely empathetic. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much again, Dr. Shalini. We will,
Thank you. Thank you, Suyash. You were a wonderful moderator. Really
my
loved being
pleasure.
here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And guys, we'll be here next week again. This time we'll be with Mr. Kamal Karant. He's one of the top 100 LinkedIn voices. Do join us next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Please spread the word among your friends. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.